still good with eScribe and our streaming?
I am getting everything set back up. We had a minor shutdown here too. So bear with me. Give me like 2 minutes and I'll get eScribe rolling again.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I do have us on YouTube, but I am running into eScribe issues. I think the clerks can help me with that on the backside a little bit later. So I think you're safe to proceed.
Okay, great. So I think we'll do that. And apologies for the technical issue. We'll be back in order. And it appears as though most of the members and actually some additional folks have joined. As discussed before, we're going to now have 35 minutes. I went a little longer in the last section, so I'm going to do 38 minutes each for opposition testimony and then proponent testimony. And as I've said all along, we're going to run out of time, and we're going to be have this back for a public hearing and another committee meeting, and we'll get through it as we can. So, if I could see a show of hands of who intends to give comment in this next section. This again is for opponents. Okay. I see 4 at this point, and 5. And so what I will do is like I said before, this is going to be more like the legislature, where there's a limit, but it's not specific to an individual, but rather to the group. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to start with individuals who have indicated to me that they intend to share a visual. And so I'm going to start with Mr. Cox. Mr. Cox, are you able to unmute yourself and join us?
Yeah, the screens went through some adjustments because I was being promoted to panelist. But, and thank you, I'm R.T. Cox, I'm president of the Friends of Grant Creek, and I am not going to present today, but I just wanted to give you a little roadmap. Mike Cole with the Grant Creek Fire Task Force is going to make a presentation, and then I think a traffic expert who was retained by the Friends of Grant Creek and Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation is going to present, and that might use up most of the available time. And then I know there's some other people that I may or may not know whether they want to present, but I'm going to, in the interest of time, save my presentation for the next hearing.
Okay, so I have Mike Cole first, and then I have Rick Nyes and Kim Burke also with their hands up. So we'll get to them as Mr. Cole finishes, and Mr. Parker as well. Mike, you're welcome to join us and present your testimony.
All right. Is my volume okay for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, I'll share the screen with you here to start. So we're going to discuss wildfire and risk up Grant Creek and some issues that we have with the staff report primarily. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm Mike Cole, the project leader for the Grant Creek Wildfire Risk Task Force. And I hope you had the opportunity to read all three documents the task force has provided over the past 3 years. And those involve influences of climate change and associated wildfire and evacuation hazards related to proposed development. And I'll be frank in some of my statements, but I'll be honest in my analysis of the staff report, which summarizes the entire project. So this slide you're looking at right now, this is the last 20 years of fires around the Missoula area. Those two blue small ones, those were prior to the last 20 years. And as you can see, in the last 20 years, climate has influenced fire behavior significantly, and we have much larger fires encroaching in the urban interface. That area outlined in red is Grant Creek right there, about 26,000 acres, not including Snowball. So one thing about the research we've done is nobody has challenged any of that research or findings, including the developer's wildfire risk analysis. But the staff report didn't reference any of it, which surprises me because it includes information from the city planning department, the city fire department, Missoula County, state of Montana, and the Forest Service. And all that documentation identifies Grant Creek as a priority area of significant problems in regard to wildland urban interface due to ingress egress issues. In fact, that's the only location where there's a single entrance in and out of the city limits with a major population in it. So the staff report was pretty silent on our 3 years of research, but wildfire, climate change, and risk factors specific to this project. We spent a lot of time working on it to explain why increased density is not a good idea in a wildland urban interface. And what's going to follow are some obvious shortcomings we found, mostly related to the WUI. So what I'll do is I'll show you what we're looking at here. This won't have time to see the whole thing, but this is a 360-degree view from the Prospect Homeowners Association that adjoins the proposed development. And you can see what there are for grassland. This is the environment that we live in up here, all the way up into the middle of Grant Creek is mostly grasslands, joining Butler Creek and adjoining Rattlesnake and going to the west. And right there is where the new development is. And you can see what those grasslands look like. So let's go take a look at the development itself. So review criteria 16, 17, and 25 states that in different wording, but the same context, that a property contains existing multi-dwelling structures. So our answer to that is, of course it does, because the last rezone was denied, and that's what the existing zoning allows, is 3-story structures. So that's not really a good argument to support rezoning in the wildland urban interface. So next one, review criteria 17 talks about 4-story buildings, make elevators more affordable, and allows accessible units on all floors. So what it does is it also makes evacuation more difficult during fires if elevators are shut down and you have to get multiple persons with disabilities down stairwells. 4-story buildings and elevators to get handicapped people into higher levels is not a good rationale in the wildland urban interface. The next thing we looked at was just a short thing, and more of this will be covered later. The traffic impact study talks about full build out will not create any new roadway capacity problems in this area. So yet the TIS has been rejected by the city 3 times in 20 and 22 because of incorrect data analysis. So the revised one in April that came through still does not contain what the city engineer requested in regard to calculating increased trips per day specific to townhouses that are proposed there. There's been ample there's going to have a lot of reasons to question the quality of the analysis and the data it contains, especially during the most hazardous time of the year in the wildland urban interface, which is wildfire and tourist season. So what we're concerned about is, why is everyone afraid of obtaining the correct data for the traffic study? Is it because the numbers won't jive with the development proposal? Because the developers had a year and a half to gather that correct data at the appropriate time periods. Criteria number 22 talks about ensuring an adequate supply of affordable housing to maintain a quality labor pool. And as described by the developer early on, whatever the market will bear is what the apartment dwellings are going to go for. So there's no way this will be available to meet this goal. And all it does is increase density in the wildland urban interface. Criteria number 24 says you need to create a range of housing development for the workforce. This proposal eliminates the type of housing allowed by current zoning, which is single family housing. And all this proposal does is, once again, put people into expensive apartments and increase density in the wildland urban interface. I can't emphasize that enough. Criteria 25, discourage encroachment in the wildland urban interface. So this is the only mention of the wildland urban interface in the report, other than the reference to the risk analysis submitted by the developer. And I appreciate the fact that they have submitted some information about the wildland urban interface in their presentation today. But in the report, it simply states the site is located in the WUI. So we have 23 pages over those 3 years of current research that explains why increased density continues to grow throughout the country in the wildland urban interface, and it's the worst place you can increase density. This here in Missoula, this is the urban fringe. This is not the urban core. So let's move on here a little bit and do a little bit of a reality check about what is in Grant Creek and what's at risk, and wildland fires and grass, recent events, our environment in Grant Creek, and how big is a large wildfire. So this will give you an idea what happened in Boulder, Colorado in December. This just reinforces the fact that we have a year-round fire season, not only here, but also in Montana. What you're looking at is a grass fire coming into a development in Superior, a town in Boulder County. And this is, 2 days before January 1st. So if you compare that with what our grassland landscape looks like in Prospect, you'll see some familiarities. We have subdivisions. We have grasslands that surround this. We have grasslands that run all through the north side of Missoula. So the big problem is what the wind speed is and what the fire behavior is doing. So this is from March 14th, last year. Shows you what the grass was doing then. It was all dead, and there was plenty of fuel in the ground. All you need is an ignition and some wind. So here's in Boulder County what some of the subdivision cul-de-sacs looked like. On the right-hand side, it's what you see in the Prospect subdivision, pretty similar. Streets, cul-de-sacs, parks. You notice the deciduous trees in the fire in Boulder County, Colorado are completely gone. And a few of the conifers remain. As you swing around the point here, you're going to see where the new development is, where the apartment buildings down at the base of Grant Creek. So again, this is October from last fall. This is what the grass environment looks like in this entire surrounding area, from the west all the way towards the east, coming across the Missoula landscape. And what we have at different times of the year is wind. And that does become a big issue. So the next one is item number 37. And it says, must comply with the International Fire Code through the building permit process. So does multifamily housing burn? It certainly did in Boulder County. So not only apartment buildings, but hotels. The fire burned into the urban core of some of those towns, destroyed businesses. In all, there were over 1,000 homes that were damaged, and mostly destroyed, 1,000 structures destroyed, probably others damaged. And this was only a 6,000 acre fire, which would be pretty small for the fires that we have around Missoula. And the last time I looked, the total cost of this so far has been $1.2 billion. That's billion. This is the most expensive fire in Colorado history to date. So, based on that item number 37 about international fire code, I'm going to bet that the apartments and hotels in Boulder County, Colorado, that burned in this fire, I'm betting they followed those codes. And the same type of grassland fuel hazards adjacent to this proposed development. So the thing is, it's all about fire size, wind speed, number showers. And that's why it's called the wildland urban interface. Next is the risk analysis provided by the developers. That's item 38. Talks about wildland fire risk within the development is negligible. And they brought that up again today. There is no negligible category in the wildland urban interface. There's low, medium, and high hazard categories. And there are general categories on a map to give you some information about hazards. So a serious or extreme wildfire event will quickly throw any of that designation right out the window. So with climate change, these designations will also have to adapt. And I'm guessing that this fire in Colorado was probably listed in the low, maybe medium wildfire risk category originally, similar to the development at 2920 Expo Parkway. The next item I want to look at is number 39. It's the statement of Fire Chief Gordy Hughes. And we kind of looked at it as it was kind of cherry picked in favor of the proposal. So if you go to item 20 in the agency comments, in the attachments, you'll see his statement, which is an email. I'll summarize some of these statements that are specific to the wildland urban interface, but left out of item number 39. And these are quotes. Wildfire is inevitable. Virtually no area in and especially around the city of Missoula is immune, which goes right along with what the developers presented today. That's correct. But we're on the urban fringe, not the urban core, which is more susceptible. Next quote is, citizens are placed at risk of property damage and physical injury and death. Next quote, the easiest solution to this dilemma would be to restrict development. And this is me talking again. You could do this here. His next quote is, however, this is not feasible. So we make adjustments or perhaps turn a blind eye and do nothing at all. In this situation, you have the means and opportunity to restrict development because you have existing zoning that's here. And that's my quote. The last one, he actually goes on to discuss what he terms the next best option. And then he starts describing evacuation procedures. So if you can tell me how many development proposals within the city limits of Missoula has evacuation been identified as the next best option? So now I'd like to put his statements in some context though. So first of all, you have a quality fire and police department in the city. I've worked in both of those categories in my career. But as far as development of the wildland urban interface, I believe you're placing these folks in untenable situations, especially as you increase density in this area. Let me go to the next slide here. So I'll give it, for instance, you can kind of look at this slide and give you some idea about this. What we're talking about, we start talking about large fire size. The fire and police agencies, we don't run away from problems, we run towards them. And they won't tell you they can't do something until they actually can't. And that's how we operate, and that's what the public expects. So for example, SWAT teams don't exist to make routine traffic stops, and incident management teams don't exist to deal with sheds on fire in people's backyards. We don't train on best case scenarios in emergency response. The evacuation plan that's been identified in the developer's risk analysis uses best case scenario, and it's based solely on an idea. It's never been tried, never been implemented. To our knowledge, never been put into an exercise to even try. And that's not the fault of the fire department, because when they go to these fires, they don't just do firework, they do a lot of other things besides that, and you only have so many people to do it. So let's talk about what happens when things go wrong. And these are specific to Grant Creek. When we have things that go wrong, last time they're called an incident within an incident on our teams. And sometimes multiple multiples of these occur in one incident. So you can't predict them, but when you make decisions on approving or not approving a development proposal in the wildland urban interface, and I don't care where it is in the city of Missoula, you can significantly affect what your fire and police departments would be expected to do, or sometimes even be capable of doing. So for instance, I already talked about high winds, and everybody says, well, grass fires are easy to put out. Well, not in high winds they aren't. And then everybody says, well, you're close to the airport. You've got aircraft, helicopters. Well, that's good until you get about over 20 mile per hour wind speeds, and helicopters with buckets can't operate in those speeds. And if you have put up aircraft with retardant in them, the higher that wind speed, when you put that retardant out of that chute, as soon as that wind catches it, it's going to scatter that whatever it wants to. The other thing you can't do in high winds is you can't put firefighters directly at the head of the fire to stop them. The other problem we run into is other emergencies ongoing elsewhere. The best example in Missoula is in 2011 when we had 11 starts out of one fire. The one that we couldn't catch was Lolo Peak. And I know that because I spent 30 days on that fire that summer. And you only have so many resources available. The other thing is you're looking at a lack of resources. The time of year we have fire season is when everybody else in the continental United States fire season is already going. And we get into what's called planning level 4 and planning level 5, which limits our ability to order resources, teams, and whatever you want that you need. So you have to prioritize where you're going to put resources. And that causes severe problems. Traffic accidents is a big one, and Grant Creek Road has plenty of them. This one occurred in November 3rd of this year, and you can see how traffic accidents clog up the entire road system. And the other thing is, if you remember this past November, we had 50-mile-an-hour winds in a storm come through here that took down trees throughout Missoula, tore siding off apartment buildings, I noticed down by the Good Food store. So are we immune to this? We are definitely not immune to it. And fires like that cause ember showers, and ember showers are what get into the nooks of crannies of homes and apartment buildings and start fires.
Mr.
And
Cole,
another
just
thing
so
is-
you know, you've used about little over half the opposition testimony time, just so you're aware.
Okay, I'll be done in just a little bit here. So another one is, what do you do if Grant Creek is cut off by fire? So you had a chance to look at this. I'm sure why I had this up earlier to give you an idea of what we're talking about large fires now. These are the traffic numbers. We have a total of 41 traffic accidents in the last 3 years, including more accident injuries since the improvements were put in at I-90. As you can see, that trend is going up. So yes, we have those here. Here's a good example from last summer. 4 days apart, 2 traffic accidents, both involve first responders. They can't be going to fires because they're doing this. The clouds up there are typical of what we get for lightning storms coming through. The traffic accident on the right, that was an ambulance that was hit by a car coming off the westbound lane of I-90. The ambulance was responding to another traffic accident in the narrows up between Prospect and Stonebridge. So that's kind of problems we have up here. So I've got one last thing I want to talk about. A couple of things. There isn't any mention of climate change, influence on fire behaviors, potential impacts, and increased risk in the WUI and either the developer's risk analysis or staff report. But I know darn well all those fire departments in the valley are paying attention to it. And both Chief Hughes' statement and the developer's risk analysis were prepared before the December fires in Montana and Colorado. First responders were impacted by accidents. Moral hazard. The final thing I want to tell you about is a term used by economists to describe a situation where people are less inclined to adequately prepare for disaster because they think they're insulated from the consequences. So that same term can be applied to decision makers. For instance, in this situation, increased density within the WUI is going to provide more housing and increase tax revenues for the city. But if structure is burned down, the city's not going to pay for it. It's going to come out of taxpayers' pockets. So you're talking about short-term gain here, which doesn't take into consideration the potential for long-term impacts in the event of wildfire. And the people on this risk, some of the members of the task force we've seen what these long-term impacts are up close and personal, psychologically, financially, and community-wide, not just to members of the public who've had losses, but also to the firefighters and first responders themselves. And when we talk about things being typical, like found in the developer's risk analysis, talking about fire weather conditions, that implies business as usual. We haven't been in that category for quite a few years now. So we can modify home ignition zones, which the developer's analysis focuses on. That's no guarantee a building's going to survive a wildfire. In a way we look at it, if you approve this rezone, it's going to be business as usual. It's not just in this canyon. You have this problem that's in every single canyon in the city limits, and the county does too. But if you turn a blind eye, like Chief Hughes' comment said, all it does is increase the risk to Grand Creek residents, including the new ones that are going to be apartment dwellers or whatever they're going to live in. So I think you need to maintain your credibility by having all the facts available to make an informed decision. And you can't operate in a knowledge vacuum in the WUI. Every decision made here affects every resident, regardless of your political jurisdiction you're looking at. And I thank you for your time. And I can't submit a narrative of this presentation if that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate the time. We'll go next to, oh, pardon me, I lost my presenter list. I'll go next to Kim Burke. And Kim, you should be able to join us and give your testimony.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. I'm not really sure why we're here today because nothing has really changed with the rezone request, except that KJA is proposing a development agreement that council cannot consider in their up or down vote. So you will have to vote on the merits of the rezone to RM 145 and how well that matches up with the growth policy, which is much more than a one-page future land use map. The map that even Mr. de Grand Prix admitted in 2020 was a macro look rather than a micro look. Apparently, the city is now launching an effort to fix some of these inconsistencies between zoning and planning, but it won't be in time for this project. And I would add that I was part of the process when they did the original zoning back in 1989, and the zoning was for R1, which was single family homes next to Prospect, and R4, which was townhomes, multi-dwellings that were no more than 2 stories tall and 30 feet tall maximum. So somehow in the interim, the zoning got changed without us really noticing from the townhome type development to apartments, but that's water over the dam. So what's not changed is that all of the policy goals and objectives that they didn't meet last time around aren't met again this time. It's not in the urban core. It's not served by transit and probably never will be if Miller Creek isn't. It isn't connected to services, parks, schools by safe multimodal means of transportation. Anyone who wants to ride a bike anywhere is taking their life in their hands until we get better connections via the Scott Street North Reserve trails that should happen in a decade or so. The proposed development doesn't harmonize with existing development or blend with neighborhood character. It replaces existing zoning that would allow 495 mixed dwelling types, including some ownership opportunities, and it replaces it with all market rate rentals. And the hillsides are still not protected from development other than by a promise. The proposal comes with a traffic impact study that only considers the impact of 700 units when the zoning change would allow possibly up to 1185, although 900 might be more likely. The traffic impact study talks about full build out, but doesn't include additional traffic generated by other properties that are already zoned or subdivided for development, including 3 commercial lots accessing off Expo Parkway. There's a residential development allocation map in the R Missoula Growth Plan that says that 1,270 units are already permitted by zoning in the Grant Creek neighborhood, UFTA, Urban Fringe Development Area, that have not yet been built. I understand this to mean that what can happen under existing zoning will already triple the amount of dwellings in Grant Creek, even before Mr. Alt's request to increase density on his property. His TIA should not be speaking about full build out without considering what is already allowed, even if it hasn't been built yet. The MDT upgrade was long awaited and addressed some existing problems created 20 years earlier by constructing an under-engineered intersection in the first place. The northbound problems aren't addressed by any of that and will only be exacerbated by 700 apartments, the dwellers returning home from work trying to turn left across Snowball Road traffic coming downhill, for example. The whole intersection is dysfunctional with 41 reported accidents in 3 years, many relating to left turns. Perhaps it's time for powers that be to sit down and create a master plan for Missoula's Western Gateway, which also happens to be Grant Creek residents' only way out and emergency responders' only way in. And small fires become big fires when they don't get responded to quick enough. So the way in is maybe even more important than the way out. There are many things that could be done to fix these problems, and I volunteer to serve on that master plan committee if citizens are allowed on that. Meanwhile, you are considering a rezoning that will run with the land even if the development agreement fails or if the developer moves on. And speaking of development agreements, first you need to be very sure that it's even legal with the rezoning, because it sure looks like it isn't. And where does that leave us? It appears that KJA has wasted everyone's time and energy when he could have come back with a PUD request that would have provided the certainty that is needed here. There is one thing that has changed since Mr. Alt's first request in 2020, and that is that fire seasons have gotten even longer and more destructive and scarier than they were just a few years ago. And oh, by the way, a whole lot of new apartment buildings and building permits have been approved in Missoula, more than 2,500 in 2021 alone, according to a February article in the Missoulian. The existing zoning allows 495 dwelling units in a mix of apartments and single family homes, and it would increase the number of dwellings in Grant Creek by 80%. 80%. Grant Creek residents have come out in support of this existing zoning. That is doing our share to meet Missoula's need for housing. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate your time. I know Mr. Parker has a presentation. Grant, I'm gonna have you enter the meeting. We've got a little over 8 minutes left of the opposition testimony time. So if that's enough time for you, you're welcome to take it away.
I'll be very brief. I'm just going to turn it over to Rick Nyes. As Bob Abelin said, he's been working on this for 3 years, and he still hasn't collected the data that the city and we have been asking for. He continues to make the same mistakes, and as he indicated, continues to come up with the same conclusion based on bad data. So we hired Rick Nyes, who's the principal traffic engineer with Greenlight Engineering. When I say we, the Friends of Grant Creek of the Rocky Mountain Foundation. Rick is a registered professional engineer in the states of Montana, Oregon, and Washington. He has over 22 years of experience in the preparation of traffic impact studies, working both in the public and private sectors. He is a former president of the Oregon section of the Institute of Transportation Engineers and former chair of the Lake Oswego Transportation Advisory Board. You can see his report on page 419 of the packet that has been prepared for this committee. And with that, both Aaron Nielsen and I will be joining others in presenting testimony next week. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. And Mr. Nyes, you're welcome to take it away, and you've got about 6 minutes left.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Rick Nyes. I'm the principal traffic engineer with Greenlight Engineering. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Montana. I've been asked by Friends of Grant Creek and Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation to review the applicant's traffic impact study, also known as the TIS, which was prepared by Abilene Traffic Services. I provided an April 29th letter, which I encourage you to review in full. I'll just briefly touch on some of the issues with the traffic impact study. The first issue is the study area of the TIS. The TIS projects that the development will add over 2,000 vehicles per day to Reserve Street south of the I-90 interchange. Yet the TIS analyzes no intersections south of that interchange. The city's threshold for requiring a traffic impact study is just 200 vehicles per day. So the development will add 10 times the city's threshold to that section of road alone. The development will have a significant impact on areas south of that interchange. Without studying this section of road, it's difficult to say what the result will be. The Activate Missoula 2045 plan went into great effort and expense to analyze the existing and expected congestion across the city. That plan illustrates existing and worsening congestion on Reserve Street south of I-90 to failing levels of service, indicating unacceptable levels of delay. The city requirements call for, and I quote, "The traffic impact study shall include analysis and impacts to all transportation facilities, including adversely affected nearby streets and intersections, public transit, bicyclists, and pedestrians." The requirement is for all adversely affected nearby intersections, not just some. The proposed development is anticipated to increase the volume on this section of Reserve Street by over 10%. It is known that this section of road is congested today, and it's known this section of road will become more congested, and yet none of that section of road has been studied as part of the TIS. The exclusion of this area from the study, the traffic impact study, defies logic. Next, the TIS assumes there will be absolutely zero growth at any of the study intersections from year 2019 through 2032, which is a period of 13 years, aside from the impacts of the development itself. The TIS notes that development will be constructed in phases and may not be completed for up to 10 years. The TIS relies on traffic counts that were conducted in 2019 that have not been adjusted to current conditions at all. It is industry standard to analyze the transportation system at a point when development is completed and operating. As noted earlier, the city went to great expense to analyze congestion and growth in the city. Based on the Activate Missoula plan, the city is expected to grow in population by 48% between 2015 and 2045, which is an average of 1.6% per year. A 0% growth rate as assumed in the TIS from 2019 to 2032, again, a period of 13 years, likely does not represent reality and significantly undercounts where Missoula expects to be in 2032 when this development has completed its construction. Is it a reasonable conclusion that there'll be no additional vehicles using the I-90 interchange all the way to 2032 versus what was there in 2019? I've personally never seen an assumption like this in a traffic impact study, especially over such a long period of time. Next issue is the intersection capacity analysis of the I-90 interchange intersections. As Mr. Ablin testified today, the intersection capacity analysis provides a lettered grade at intersections, which is based on intersection delay. The TIS narrative states that the I-90 intersections operate with a 130-second traffic signal cycle length. Later on in the actual analysis portion of the traffic impact study, it analyzes intersections with a 194-second cycle length, or over 3 minutes. Clearly, these things conflict. As Mr. Ablin noted, he agrees that his analysis is incorrect. We obtained traffic signal timing data from the Montana DOT. We observed video of the intersection operations ourselves, and then we confirmed with the Montana DOT that both intersections operate with a 100-second cycle length. So none of Mr. Ablin's analysis of these intersections is based in reality. He notes today that the intersections operate better than previously analyzed. Of course, none of that information is provided in the record, so it is not available to anyone for review. He also notes that he tested 2,000 units of multifamily units and determined that there would be no issues at those intersections. But again, that information is not available for any review whatsoever. Next, there are numerous traffic count issues in the traffic impact study. It is typical and actually required by the city that traffic counts be collected over a 2-hour time period. For example, the city requires traffic counts to be collected from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. rather than just say 4:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. The purpose of this is so that the peak hour is actually analyzed when traffic is the highest rather than just a randomly picked hour. Instead, the traffic count data was collected over a 45-minute or 1 hour time period that was seemingly collected at random, which is in clear violation of city traffic impact study requirements. There are multiple examples of this in the traffic impact study. There are also unexplained errors in the traffic counts, or perhaps just math errors. When digging into the numbers presented in the TIS, it is difficult to comprehend exactly what is happening. For example, there are no intersections or significant driveways between the intersection of Grant Creek Road, Expo Parkway, and the Grant Creek Road, Stonebridge Drive intersection. But the TIS illustrates substantially different traffic volumes flowing in and out of those two intersections that just simply don't make any sense or add up in any way. Although these counts were collected on the same day during the same time period, and they really should be very, very close in the actual numbers, but they don't match.
Just about 1 minute left.
Thank you. Instead, there are discrepancies of almost 100 vehicles per hour between the intersections, which again just defy logic. Next is at the time that some of the traffic counts were collected, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation's visitor center was closed. So none of that has been considered as part of at least a portion of the traffic study. Lastly, there are certainly other elements of the TIS that don't meet industry standard and fail to, in my opinion, represent a complete TIS. For example, the TIS didn't utilize a peak hour factor in the analysis, which basically results in it not analyzing the peak 15 minutes of the transportation system, which is standard. The TIS didn't include any analysis of trucks, buses, or bicycles, include them in the counts. And it also didn't include any of the crash data whatsoever for any review or discuss where crashes are actually occurring on the roadway system. So I wanted to thank you for your time, and I'm available for any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. We appreciate that. We are out of time for this portion of the meeting, so I'm going to move us along. I do see a few other hands, and I welcome anyone who hasn't spoken yet to come back next week. So at this point, we can move on to proponents. Anyone who wants to speak in favor of this proposal can feel free to raise your hand at this time. And we have Heather Harp. Welcome, Heather.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right, everyone?
We can. Nice to see you, Heather.
Good to see you all, colleagues. I know all of you are sitting in your seats, and I know this is yet one more difficult development project that lies in front of you that you need to make a decision in the coming weeks. As a former member of this council, I spent 4 years in that same seat and trying to make informed decisions about what's best for this community. In that course of time, we've all come to learn how important it is to listen to our community and learn to understand where people are coming from. And even today, as I sat and listened to today's presentation and all of the comments from the opposition, they are very similar concerns that we've heard time and time again. And I understand where people are coming from, that they want to protect their backyards from wildfire, from traffic, congestion, and the like. It is a normal course of how we belong to a community. We want the very best. And yet here we are in a housing crisis that is completely unprecedented. We have 2,400 homes that were not built over the last decade, in large part due to significant contributing factors of neighborhood resistance. We have other factors, of course, but that has been the primary one. And it's not just in Missoula, it is a nationwide problem. I understand that we all have climate goals, that we want to improve our climate. I understand we have public safety goals that we want to make sure we protect our public. But what happens time and time again with opposition that is privileged when they come to this table is that they have the resources to be able to get folks to show up. The fact that I'm the first person to stand up in support of this project speaks to how hard it is to get people to say yes, that I will be supporting additional housing development. We have to think about public safety a little bit differently. When I think about the number of folks who have experienced big rental increases that have basically evicted them from the places that they live, that becomes a public safety problem that we also have to address. We have prioritized many times parking of cars and the beautification of buildings over protecting people and making sure that they have a roof over their heads for themselves and their children. We all know those absolutely gory details that we hear time and time again of how people have lost their houses and now they're on the streets. And so where do they go? We find them on the Reserve Street campgrounds. We find them in our neighborhoods. And all of that ends up being an even greater, more costly problem. I don't disagree that wildfire has happened in other communities. And yet our crisis today is taking care of those who need our assistance. We also have a JEDI resolution that our community passed: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that means making sure we stand up for those who very, very much deserve a roof over their heads. And they don't have the capacity to be able to do that. They don't necessarily have the internet connection to be here in front of you today to stand up for themselves. I leave you with this. After coming back from Habitat International's conference just a couple of weeks ago, where the message is double your housing production by all means necessary, we need to be the change so that we can build more and serve more. But if you do not allow affordable housing in your backyard, then you will have more homeless in your front yard. I encourage all of you to follow both policy as well as the staff expertise that has indicated that approval of this project is very important for the rest of our community. Losing 200 homes that is unacceptable. We got too many folks that are just on the cusp of desperation. Please do your best to stand up for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and thanks for joining us today. Do we have any additional proponent testimony at this time? I see Ms. Jones has her hand up. Gwen, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just waiting. It sounds like there is another proponent. I had a request to staff for some information I would like to see next Wednesday. Do you want me to go ahead with that right now?
Let's come back to that. I'm going to go to, I have a proponent on the phone, and so our phone participant should be able to unmute, and I believe you press *6.
Yes, that worked.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. You're kind of faint though.
Okay, great. Sorry, I can't hear myself, so I wasn't sure. My name's Steve Bassett. I live on the north side. I lived in Missoula for 12 years. And I think some of my comments echo that I think this is a wider issue, a wider community issue for all of Missoula. A lot of this is being focused as a grant, but the undersupply of homes is truly increasing the prices of rentals everywhere. A lot of people that I know are having anything less than $1,100 for like studio apartments. It's hard to even though Missoula is such a dog-friendly place, it's also hard to find pet-friendly apartments. So, but yes, overall, the rent relief issue, I think, is huge and affects everybody in Missoula. People moving here, current Missoulians who can't afford to live in Missoula anymore, or potentially being priced out, or have to change their living situation because rents are raising. Personally, my landlord does not want to do a year-long lease, and that scares me that I am month to month. They can change my rent at any time. Fortunately, in my neighborhood, there is more housing going in, so hopefully that will. But again, I think that's something that's happening all over Missoula. It's not just in Grant Creek. Everybody's being affected by the lack of. I don't think it should just be. It feels, again, like I said earlier, it feels like it's being framed as a all of Missoula. We'll leave there because. But thank you for your time, and that's okay.
And thank you for your comments. Your audio was breaking up a little bit. I think I caught the substance of it, but I really appreciate you providing comment. If you want to provide additional comment, if the audio didn't make it through, you're welcome to also leave us a voicemail at 406-552-6012. And would anyone else like to comment as a proponent? Okay. I'm not seeing anyone else at this time, so that opportunity will come around at the next meeting as well. So we have about 10 minutes left of the scheduled meeting, and I think this is a good opportunity to get some requests out. If we have requests of staff, if we have requests of the applicant or any of the commenters, we could get those out on the floor now. I'll go to Gwen first, and then I have a couple myself. Gwen?
Great, thank you. I appreciate everyone taking the time today to come and give comment. Dave, our planner, I would like to address this to you for a week from today, this coming Wednesday, May 11th. I would like to have Chief Gordy Hughes in attendance. I would like to be able to question him more extensively on how the fire department would handle an evacuation. I understand that part of this may be Sheriff's Department. I don't know if we could have someone from the Sheriff's Department here or not, but I'll leave it to you, Dave. And I'm interested in understanding better how we would get upper, middle, or lower Grant Creek people out if there is a fire. Fire is a big issue, and given the magnitude of the safety issue and that this is a decision we have to make, I need to have a much better grasp of what our tools are to evacuate people, how we would approach it, what that translates to, what best practices are. I just need more than basic statements. I need some information. So if Dave, would you like me to follow up with an email to flesh this out more, or is that sufficient?
No, I think that's sufficient. But if there's any more specifics come to mind, please feel free to reach out.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. Amber next.
Yeah, thanks. I was thinking along the same lines as Gwen, but I'm wondering if Adrian Beck from Emergency Services might be able to attend. Would that be a possibility? And I don't know, maybe I think that's, emergency response is pretty coordinated with the Sheriff's Department. So I don't know who would, I don't know if she's the right person, but I would like to hear more about and have more input from staff, both the city and the county, on how we would deal with evacuating those living above, I guess those living there, but also those living above in Grant Creek.
Just one question. Do we know when the meeting will be, at what time next Wednesday, or will that be decided on Monday night?
I don't know. I think we can work with the clerk's office if we want to find a more preferable time. We had a lot of stuff that couldn't get scheduled this week, so I think we have a full week next week as well. But I'll see if we can get a good, multi-hour block, maybe in the afternoon again. This seems like it might be a more flexible time. So, but I'll follow up, Dave, after the meeting. Mirta?
Thanks. I too was gonna suggest Adrian Beck or some from the Incident Command Center, whatever it's called. I think it'd be important to know how prepared we are to handle a situation like that. But also, if we could get our transportation planners or maybe Jeremy Keene or someone to better distill for us what the requirements and expectations are for a traffic impact analysis or a traffic impact study, and how this project is meeting those requirements or not. I think it'd be important to get a little bit of clarification on what it is that we are looking at and what we should be looking at and expecting. That I think that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that it's my understanding that a traffic impact study is not required for a rezone application. And so I would like to better understand when a traffic impact study is required and what can be mitigating factors as a result of that traffic impact study. Because my understanding is that that's typically required more at the building permit phase.
Yeah, that information would be great.
Great. Okay. Kristen, earlier I cut you off because we were out of time for that particular area. Do you want to take the last couple of minutes and go back to your question, or do you want to hold that for next time?
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm not quite sure how or who to ask, but I'm really curious about how many residences there are further up the valley that are in that higher danger zone, that higher fire danger zone. Is it like a third of the valley? Is it 10% of the valley? I would be curious to know how many folks live in that high fire danger area, or maybe it's just Forest Service, but that was my question.
Okay, great. We can see if we can get an answer to that next week as well. Anything else? All right. It does feel like traffic. Oh, and I want to flag the development agreement also about I want to understand more from city staff and city attorney's office, the city perspective on that, and contrast that with what Mr. McCormick shared with us today, and just understand that mechanism a little better. So I'd like to talk about that. And what I think I'll do is on Monday, and hopefully before, but I'll try to shape the meeting into rough thematic areas so that we can spend, we can have a traffic hour and a fire hour and however long we need, and then that way we can make sure that we get the appropriate staff here for the appropriate time, and then we'll have, of course, opportunity to continue with public comment and additional questions and discussion involving the staff and applicants here. So thanks everyone for sticking with us till 6 p.m. and it's still sunny out, so maybe go outside for a few minutes. We will be adjourned. Thanks everyone.